Order. May I take this opportunity to wish all colleagues present a Happy New Year and call on Dawn Butler to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and Happy New Year to everybody too. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship in regards to us considering the pay gaps in the workplace. So Roger, there are multiple pay gaps in the workplace. I've had emails about age pay gaps, size pay gap, accents pay gaps, and as a certified Cockney, I can know that this is true. And just for the record, I say some of the most intelligent people I know are Cockneys. But today, on Ethnicity Pay Gap Day, I want to focus on gender, ethnicity, and disability pay gaps. The key thing is that if you measure it, you can fix it. And at the current rate, it will take another 40 years to fix the gender and ethnicity pay gap. Now, nobody should feel happy about that slow rate of progress. So, and imagine how long it will take to fix the disability pay gap. It will take even longer. And last year, the Fawcett Society reported that Equal Pay Day fell on the 20th of November, 2 days earlier than the year before. That essentially means that on that day, the 20th of November, women were working for free for the rest of the year. And so, Roger, it is shocking that on average, women earn £630 less a month than their male counterpart. And on social media, people sometimes say, oh, what's this all about? And are you trying to reduce how much men are paid? That isn't what this is about. This is about fairness and equality. And it's about paying people more, not paying people less. And I don't want social media and the manipulation and the misinformation of people saying when we talk about equal rights and fairness, it's somehow doing down men, because it absolutely isn't. And currently, the ethnicity pay gap is 5.6% and the disability pay gap is 12.7%. That is a whopping pay gap. And we have to acknowledge that the government is to be applauded for its ambition and plan to make work pay. And the Prime Minister actually said, I think it was part of his New Year's message, that the security of working people, that is the purpose of this government. And I think that is something that we should all applaud, that working people should be secure in their job and in their work. Now, in the King's speech, companies of 250 plus employees have to report ethnicity and disability pay gaps, which is welcomed. And it's also welcomed that gender pay gap reporting has been expanded to produce equality action plans. That's great, but producing the equality action plans just isn't enough. What are companies going to do with the action plans? How are they going to ensure that they use the action plans to close the pay gaps? So it's one step, but it doesn't go far enough. And what we have to acknowledge, Sir Roger, that what we do now will actually make the workplace better for everybody. Not just women, not just disability, just people with disabilities, not just people with different ethnicities. Everybody will benefit if the workplace is fairer. And there has been research found that men want flexibility in the workplace. So often it's always framed around women wanting flexibility in the workplace. But the reality of the situation is men also want flexibility in the workplace. So if we make that a standard, then everybody will be happy. And no matter who's doing the job, no matter who's doing the work, they should be paid fairly, no matter who they are or what they look like. So I also feel there needs to be a concerted effort where we stop stereotyping people into jobs or creating structures that try and normalise inequality. And I'll tell you one case. Happy to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that point and congratulate her on securing this debate. But the Equality Act 2010 states that it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of race. Yet, in 2024, black people and 19.04% hourly mean rate less than their white counterpart. But the Employment Rights Bill provides an opportunity for employers to develop and publish an equality action plan. However, those action plans at the moment only cover gender. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the government needs to place more emphasis on ethnicity gap issues, and that the Employment Rights Bill, that's in committee stage at the moment, needs to make that right by covering that in this bill at this stage?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and she's absolutely right. Like, if we're going to make the workplace fairer, if that's our ambition, and our ambition to secure the workplace for everybody, then we should take the opportunities that are laid before us, and that is one of the opportunities where we can ensure that we not only close the gap, but we make workplaces fairer. And just on that point, Sir Roger, there was one case as a trade union official that was easy to identify, and that's where men were called chefs and women were called cooks. And chefs were paid a higher rate than the cooks. That was, if you like, an easy one once we could figure out what was going on. A more difficult case was Kay. And Kay said, I had been working as a chef with a large catering company for 10 years. During a casual conversation, my colleague mentioned he was being paid £22,000 a year. This was £6,000 a year more than me. I thought the right to equal pay would mean I was being paid fairly. But for years, I went to work each day without knowing I was being paid less than those who I was working alongside. I am not an isolated case. I know there are many women who, like me, don't realise they are experiencing pay discrimination. That picks up on my honourable friend's point in regards to the laws there, but actually, if you don't know what the person next to you is paying who's doing the same job, then you could be discriminated against. And so, Roger, some people will say, but some men and women do different jobs, they do different types of work, or they do different hours. Now, the law says the same work or work of equal value, but also taking that into consideration, even when men and women are they work the same hours and the same roles, nearly 2/3 of the gender pay gap remains unexplained. So this does point, Sir Roger, to pay discrimination. And so we must tackle, as a government, pay discrimination. And how do we do this? How do we tackle pay discrimination? And how do we move faster towards security, fairness and equality? Transparency. It's important for people to know who's being paid what and why. The right to know. We should introduce something where people have the right to know, so that in case situation, she should be able to say, how much is X being paid? So she'll know that there's a £6,000 pay deficit. And also actionable and enforceable action plans. Again, if an organisation knows that there is a pay gap, they've identified it, unless they've committed to closing that pay gap, it probably won't happen. And another way that companies can do this is that if it's assigned as a KPI, as a key performance indicator, what we found is that organisations that assign it to somebody as a KPI, real action is taken and pay gaps begin to close. And on this point, the government has a huge role to play, not just in legislation, which we can do with the Equal Pay Act, etc., but in also securing the circular economy. So the government can have an active role in making the workplace fairer by ensuring, and we've done this in some areas of government, that only companies that practice good practices, that pay people well, that pay people fairly, that don't have a pay gap, are given contracts by the government. So the government's procurement contract processes can ensure that they only give contracts to companies that follow good practices, and this will enrich the circular economy. And companies, this isn't just about doing the right thing. Companies who pay people well, that employ the right people for the right jobs, in general, they have a 15% higher profit margin than their nearest counterparts. And that also plays out in a lot of young people now are becoming socially informed. So they like to shop with companies that have good ethics, that consider climate change. And so this is something that will benefit everybody. It's a good thing to do. So Roger, as I come to the end, some may wonder why I've not mentioned fines. Well, to my knowledge, and the Minister may correct me on this, no company has ever been fined for their gender pay gap. So unless this part of the law is strengthened, it is kind of meaningless. So it'll be interesting to know how we ensure that we do fine companies who are not closing their pay gaps, and what the government plans to do with any money that is collected. And there is, Roger, a stark difference in different regions of the UK. Some do better than others. In London, it has the largest ethnicity pay gap. It currently stands at a whopping 23.8%. And it's appalling that this exists in one of the most diverse capitals, cities of the world, and also our financial capital city of the UK. And as chair of the London PLP, I want to accelerate this move to ensuring that we close those pay gaps. And I must commend Diane Grayson, the founder of #Ethnicity Pay Gap, for the work that she's doing around this. And as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for GALE, Governance and Inclusive Leadership, I launched a maturity matrix in Parliament. And this is a guide. It's available online for free for companies to implement in their workplace. So it takes them through various stages to how they can recognise and close the pay gaps. And it's been so successful, so Roger, that companies now ask for it to be expanded for disability and other things. So that is currently being done. As I say, it's a free resource, because ultimately what we want is good and better, fairer workplaces. So Roger, people should be paid fairly on merit. No one should be paid less for their work because of their gender, colour of their skin, ethnicity, background, their accent, size, age or class. And if we get this right on gender, ethnicity and disability, we will create a better and fairer work environment for all. Thank you, Sir Roger.
The question is that this House has considered pay gaps in the workplace. Order. It would appear to me that there are at least 7 members that wish to take part in this debate, apart from the front benches, who each have 10 minutes. On that basis, I'm now going to put an immediate 7-minute time limit on speeches. I may have to reduce that. That will depend upon whether or not members choose to intervene. If you do, it'll shorten the time that's available for the debate. And if you do intervene, can I just gently ask that interventions are interventions and not speeches? Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and in particular can I thank the Honourable Lady for Brent East for leading today's debate on this issue. The Honourable Lady has worked, we all know she's worked incredibly hard on this issue and this topic, and I believe it's great today that we're here to discuss this right across this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Obviously, Sir Roger, I wish to give a Northern Ireland perspective to add to the flavour of the debate, and also to make give some examples of what happens in Northern Ireland, where there's been a shortfall, where it's been addressed, and perhaps what we can do better. In terms of geographics, ethnicity, gender and so on, the UK has witnessed in the past and presently pay gaps in certain employment industries. So I believe this debate today is really important so we can get a full perspective on the situation in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. There was, Sir Roger, a large disparity on teachers' pay in Northern Ireland. Just to give an example, it probably coincided with the failure of the Northern Ireland Assembly to meet over a period of time, but nonetheless there was a clear problem, which showed in fairness to teachers working in Northern Ireland. Back in April of last year, a formal offer on teachers' pay for 2021, 2022 and 2023 was accepted by the Northern Ireland's 5 main teaching unions. The pay settlement agreed by the TNC included a clause in the starting salary for teachers in Northern Ireland to £30,000. Really important, because for too long the teachers in Northern Ireland had lagged behind in pay negotiations and pay awards. This is, and it's to be warmly received, a 24.3% increase from what was currently a starting salary, and now brings the starting salary equal to England, as it should have been for a long period of time. The title of this debate is Pay Gaps in the Workforce, and that's for male and female both, although I will refer to where women have been disadvantaged in other ways. There should be absolutely no pay disparity anyway. So equality after 4 years for teachers in Northern Ireland has eventually been achieved. To be welcomed, yeah, absolutely. But 4 years really on it? Well, that's hardly fair. In addition to this, Sir Roger, historically there have been issues in Northern Ireland and further afield in the United Kingdom regarding the pay gap for men and women. And as of 2023, the Department of Economy for Northern Ireland have revealed that the overall gender pay gap in Northern Ireland stands at 7.8% in favour of males. So the Honourable Lady referred to that in her debate, in her introduction, and I thank her for that. That's something that has to be addressed by the companies across Northern Ireland.
Member give way?
Absolutely, have it. Yeah.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Just on the issue of the gender pay gap, which he alludes to and was alluded to by the mover, would he agree with me that whatever the justification or otherwise 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, when there were different roles in society, male and female, for employment, that those days have long passed, and therefore now it has to be no distinction of any kind, whether it's gender or any other differential that there might be, and there needs to be pay equality right across the spectrum?
I thank my honourable friend and colleague for East London Derry for that intervention. And yes, I absolutely and wholeheartedly agree with that. For instance, one example, when it comes to apprenticeships available in Talis, in the armament and military production line in Belfast, young girls, young ladies have the same opportunity as young fellas and men. The same thing applies to the shipyard as well, and engineering firms right across the whole of Northern Ireland, especially in my case. I see the advantage, so the honourable gentleman is right to say that. Women where men indicating that for every £1 earned by men, women can only earn 92p. So this is something that has to be addressed to give wage equality. And sometimes, while employers are perhaps reluctant to do it, then there is a need for government to step in legislatively. The gender pay gap favours females with gaps of 3.5 and 1.7% in where there's sometimes full-time and part-time employees as well. So there is some anomalies there to be addressed. Historically, the gender pay gap has narrowed over the years, decreasing from 22.4% in 1987 to 8.7% in recent analysis. So over a period of some 27 years, there's been a great drop in the disparity. So the honourable gentleman from East London referred to historically where things are and where we are today. So there is a trend. The trend reflects, I believe, ongoing efforts towards gender pay equality. UK-wide, Sir Roger, we have witnessed further disparity. That certain ethnic minority groups experience pays disparities compared to white employees. The Honourable Lady for Liverpool Riverside referred to that in her intervention. She's absolutely right to highlight that issue, because there is a clear gap and a clear evidential gap which needs to be addressed in relation to that. For instance, between 2012 and 2022, 10-year spell, Black, African, Caribbean or British black employees consistently earned less than their white counterparts. Furthermore, studies by NISRA have identified pay disparities between disabled and non-disabled employees in Northern Ireland. And I have to say, I think the debate the Honourable Lady referred to in her introduction, but there is a disparity between those who are disabled and abled as well. So I think if they're doing the same job to the same ability, well, why, for goodness sake, then they should be getting the same pay, just because, with respect, they happen to be in a wheelchair, or they might have some visual or hearing disability, or maybe a mobility issue, can't be ignored either. Example, employees reporting for health, a proxy for disability, experience a pay gap, a gender pay gap. We hear this one, 16.8% compared to narrow gaps for those reporting very good 8.1% or good 8.4%. A real gender pay gap for disability people. Perhaps, Minister, you can give us some idea if you've had any discussions with the Minister back home. There is no doubt that so much progress has been made to address these issues, but there is still a long way to go. There is significant work to be done to ensure full pay equity across all demographics, not just in Northern Ireland but further afield in the United Kingdom. Has the Minister had a chance to talk to the Northern Ireland Assembly in relation to that? There is hope that legislation can be introduced to address this in the future. And I look to the Minister today for her commitment to ensuring these issues can be resolved. And whilst it's understood that many of these issues will be devolved, there is a responsibility in this government here centrally to ensure fairness amongst pay for all employment sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Order. In order to make it easier for members, I've asked that the clock now should run down rather than up. It's easier to work out how much time you've got left, I think, if you can see very clearly indeed. Steve Witham.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir Roger Gale. I also congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Brent East, on securing this important debate. Research in 2023 revealed that in the UK, mothers earned on average 31% less than fathers, a gap worse than it was 40 years before. The motherhood pay penalty has been overlooked by previous governments for far too long, significantly contributing to gender pay gaps. The undervaluation of care work, combined with the fact that caregiving responsibilities disproportionately fall on women, means they're often the ones who take career breaks or reduce their working hours when raising children. This leads to limited work experience and stunted career progression. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has found that while men's earnings remain largely unaffected by parenthood, women's earnings drop significantly after having children. In fact, 7 years post-childbirth, women earn, on average, less than half of what men earn. This penalty is even more severe for black and ethnic minority women who face additional barriers as the impact of motherhood is compounded by existing ethnic pay gaps and gender and race-based inequalities at work. I welcome the government's commitment to improving parents' rights in the workplace through the Employment Rights Bill. The bill's increased protections against dismissal for pregnant women, those on maternity leave, and those returning within 6 months builds on existing safeguards against redundancy for mothers, taking us a crucial step forward in addressing the penalty. Furthermore, the bill's removal of restrictions on paternity leave and pay will provide more flexibility and encourage a fairer division of parenting responsibilities between partners. What plans does the government have to directly tackle the gap between the earnings of mothers and fathers? Additionally, what specific measures are being considered for single parents who won't necessarily benefit from changes to paternity leave and who often bear the responsibility for caregiving? Diolch yn fawr.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Sir Roger Gale, and the happiest of New Years to all. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Brent East, for securing this important debate. Over 1400 years ago, Islam placed a strong emphasis on justice and fairness in all aspects of life, including the workplace. The principle of equal pay for equal work aligns with Islamic teachings that advocate for equity, justice, and human dignity. Several hadiths and Quranic verses highlight the importance of fair treatment and appropriate remuneration for employees. And Islamic principles also stress that wage disparities based on race, gender, colour, or nationality are unjust and contradict the core values of Islam and humanity. In more recent times, it is remarkable that nearly a century after women gained equal rights to vote in this country, and half a century since the introduction of the Equal Pay Act 1970, significant gaps remain in pay for women, and especially for women from minority ethnic backgrounds and those with disabilities. I therefore welcome the measures in the bill to 2024-25 as an important step in the right direction to redress this wrong through its proposals to extend reporting requirements on employers and for employers to develop and publish equality action plans, including measures to address the pay gap. However, as has been stated by my honourable friends, action plans on their own are not enough and must be implemented and enforced. I have two areas I would like the government to provide further clarification on. I note the findings of the report by the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development for 2022 and 23 that nearly a fifth of large employers with over 250 employees said they haven't carried out gender pay gap reporting, despite it being a requirement for all businesses with 250 or more employees in England, Scotland and Wales to do so. Enforcement of the reporting regulations is a responsibility of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So what steps is the government taking to ensure sufficiently robust measures are in place to ensure employers meet their reporting requirements, as well as enforcement of the implementation of action plans? Also, I note the recommendation of the TUC that reporting requirements to be extended to those businesses with 50 or more employees. Can the Minister explain why the bill confines itself to businesses with 250 or more employees and does not seek to cast the net wider? Taking comprehensive steps to address the gender, ethnicity and disability pay gaps is a moral and legal imperative that the government must address in full once and for all. Thank you.
Adrian Costigan.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir Roger, and thank you to the honourable member, my honourable friend indeed, from Brent East, for securing this very important debate today. And I should also declare an interest as Vice Chair of the Unison group of MPs. Chair, we've had gender pay gap reporting since 2017. And although it was a very welcome first step, it has proved to be too weak on its own to fully level the playing field between men and women at work, with women still being paid significantly less than men on average. Gender pay gap reporting relies on a name and shame approach that means employers can continue to report paying women less year after year without having to take any action at all to change this. So it's great news that the new Labour government has taken decisive action already by bringing forward the new Employment Rights Bill. This new law will mean employers will have to publish an action plan setting out how they will take tangible steps to reduce gender pay gaps and discrimination in the workplace. Finally, employers will be held to account to ensure they pay women fairly. But today I want to focus on disabled people in particular. Disabled workers are paid an average of over £2 an hour less than non-disabled workers. That's thousands of pounds every year that disabled workers are losing out on. Disabled women experience one of the worst pay gaps as a result of double discrimination. Not only do they suffer the gender pay gap, they also experience the disability pay gap. And the disability pay gap has barely moved over the last decade. No progress at all under the previous government, and disabled workers still losing out. So I'm delighted that the new Labour government announced straight away in the King's Speech that we would be bringing forward a new equality bill which will ensure a full right to equal pay for both disabled and Black and Asian workers. This new law will finally extend pay gap reporting to disabled workers and will mean that employers with over 250 staff have to publicly account for the difference in how much they pay their disabled staff. But as the gender pay gap has shown, we will still need to do more. And the groundbreaking Disability Employment Charter outlines some of the solutions. The Disability Employment Charter is a list of 9 demands of government that will break down the barriers for disabled people at work. It was put together by organisations such as Scope, Disability Rights UK and Unison. Over 220 employers have already backed the Disability Employment Charter, but the previous government failed to act on any of its recommendations. One of the key demands of the Charter is that disability pay gap reporting also goes alongside employment gap reporting, because too many employers just don't employ disabled people in the first place, let alone pay them properly. So I hope that the Minister will consider including mandatory publication of the level of disabled staff in larger employers, so that an employer's commitment to treating disabled people fairly can be properly assessed. Because disabled workers are twice as likely to be unemployed compared to non-disabled workers. This is caused by discrimination in recruitment, but it's also caused by workers being hounded out due to bullying and harassment or a failure to provide reasonable adjustments. Disabled workers are entitled to reasonable adjustments, often small changes that can help them do their job, by law. But research by Unison found that a quarter of disabled workers have waited over a year for adjustments to be put in place. And many just never even hear back from their employers at all. They get ignored. And the current law is just not strong enough for them to do anything about it. You can't do your job properly if you don't have the tools to do it. So, of course, these disabled workers lose out on promotion and get stuck on the bottom rung of the pay ladder. That's a key part of what causes the disability pay gap. Without the right help, many of these workers are in daily pain at work, or they struggle to perform. Next thing they know, they're out the door, an outcome that could have been avoided with changes to hours, additional breaks, or speech-to-text software, for example. What a massive waste of talent. It's led to a disability employment gap of 30% and nearly 3 million people stuck at home on long-term sick when many of them want to work. The Disability Employment Charter calls for a new right for a 2-week deadline to at least get a reply to reasonable adjustment requests. Currently, there is no deadline for a response, unlike flexible working requests, for example, where the employer needs to respond in 8 weeks. I gave evidence on this point to the House of Lords Public Services Committee in my previous role with Unison, and I welcome the committee's recommendation that there should be a 4-week deadline for responses to reasonable adjustment requests. I know the Minister will consider this issue as she works with colleagues, including the Minister for Disabled People, to bring forward proposals to help reduce the disability employment gap as well as the pay gap. Chair, disabled people are full of talent and creativity. For too long, they have been pushed out of jobs they love because of discrimination, bullying, and a simple refusal to give them the basic help they need to thrive at work. The solutions outlined in the Disability Employment Charter, including mandatory publication of the disability pay gap and the employment gap, and a deadline for responses to reasonable adjustments requests, will help to finally unleash that talent, and I look forward to this transformative Labour government taking this vital work forward. Thank you, Chair.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a privilege, as ever, to serve under your chairmanship. May I also, on behalf of everybody here, wish you a happy new year. Can I also congratulate my colleague from Brent East, who has been a consistent champion of equalities the entire time we've been in Parliament. We could forgive ourselves for feeling that we've been here before, and that's not least because it's always wonderful to see the member from Strangford in his place at any adjournment debate. But we have been asking for equal pay and for pay gaps to be addressed in this country the entire time that I've been in this House, 15 years now. We are latecomers to this debate. Women have been asking for equal pay since 1833. The first recorded instinct was in Robert Owen's Labour exchange. I'm sorry to say, as a Co-op MP, it wasn't received favourably. I hope that we can address that today. Let us also never ever forget the contribution that Barbara Castle made to this, because she paid for it with her career for championing equal pay, frankly because people in the Labour movement did not appreciate the argument that she made. And yet the argument she has made, and the argument we've always got to make, is first and foremost about our economy, because equal pay gaps represent around the case, whether it's to do with gender, whether it's to do with ethnicity, whether it's to do with disability, productivity loss of talent. We have to ask ourselves why this country is languishing in the bottom half of the OECD rankings when it comes to productivity, and why we have stagnating living standards. And one of the answers to this is that we do not make the best use of our people. So let's kill the myth that when we talk about equal pay or the gender pay gap, somehow this is women asking nicely for something as a treat. This is cold, hard economics that we're talking about today, which is why it also matters when we do things that may inadvertently increase the gender pay gap. And in my contribution today, I do want to raise some concerns with the government about that. Because when we kill the myths, we need to be clear. It's really not us, it is society. Forces Society data shows that even when men and women work in the same occupations, in the same industries, doing the same working hours, the same age, the same ethnicity, 2/3 of the difference in their incomes cannot be accounted for. That is discrimination. Let's be honest about what it is. Women ask just as often for a pay rise. Men are 4 times more likely to receive it. There is segregation within industries. And yes, absolutely, increasingly it's evident that the biggest part of the pay gap is to do with motherhood, which is what I want to come on to, because I have to be honest with the member from Montgomeryshire, I take a very different view to him on the employment bill, which is why I think we need to address it. I actually put forward legislation 5 years ago now, in October 2020, the Equal Pay Implementation and Claims Bill, because of the challenges that we are facing. The member from Ealing is absolutely right. We've had pay gap reporting for many years now. It's one thing to know there's a gap, it's another thing to actually have the tools to do something about it. And the lack of fines and the previous government's cavalier attitude towards the role of the gender pay gap, the role of ethnicity reporting, which they promised us but never ever delivered, in actually tackling those productivity gains and showing that lack of talent is a real challenge for us. But we need to give people the tools. And because there are no fines, one of the reasons why I proposed that bill was to give women the right to know the incomes of their male comparators, so they could actually bring an employment tribunal. We know that's been one of the few ways that people have actually made progress on this. If we look at the figures from last year, we can see that the average award for sex discrimination was £50,000 in this country, race discrimination £10,000, disability £17,000, but some of the awards went up to nearly £100,000. I pay tribute also to women like Carrie Gracie and Samira Ahmed, who took on major household names who were not paying women equally. This is widespread in our society. But let me, in the time remaining, then come to the issue about the motherhood pay gap, because actually it's not just that women face a penalty when they have children, it's that men face a premium. The evidence from workplaces is very clear that even when women do return to work after motherhood, they are undervalued, underpaid, they're considered to be less committed. The reverse is true for men. What a waste of talent in this country. What on earth are we doing as a nation where we think when somebody is able to juggle looking after a family, they are somehow less capable rather than more? And where we don't recognise that we're also asking men to do something impossible, which is to not be around their children at an early age and be the guy that they want them to be, because we're asking women to pick up the slack for men's employers. I am proud of many aspects of the employment bill. I'm proud of the equality action statements. I think they will be part of that shining of disinfectant on the challenge of the pay gap that we have. But when we're talking about the tools to tackle this, we have to recognise if we inadvertently reinforce the stereotype that only women look after children, we may actually make the pay gap worse. And there is a lot of evidence that even those women who do not have children experience discrimination in the workplace because employers, of course, think they might go and have children. So my concern here is to raise with the Minister not only the need to introduce a right to know. That legislation I wrote in 2020 was not actually me, it was a brilliant woman called Daphne Romney, who is a fantastic QC on these issues, and she worked with the Fawcett Society as well, and I hope I can encourage the Minister to have a look at it and see if there's anything there she might want to pick on. But I also want to bring to Minister's attention my concern that if we strengthen only mothers' rights in the workplace, we might reinforce the idea that it's only mothers who look after children, and therefore the gender pay gap could get worse, not better, and we will miss out on people. The answer to this, therefore, is not to reduce those rights, but it is to give fathers and second carers in a relationship equal paid and protected rights to leave, so that actually, frankly, everybody of a certain age who might be looking after children is equally discriminated against. PAPA, paid and protected leave for fathers and for second carers, is something that we could do through this piece of legislation. I'm not going to tell the Minister how long it should be, but that principle that fathers need protected time in their own right is possibly one of the greatest tools for equality and for improving productivity that we could bring in to our economy. And many of us who are so delighted to see a government that is prioritising tackling the pay gap are equally concerned to make sure we do not miss this opportunity to really make the progress that we need, to give dads back the time they need to be brilliant dads and brilliant employees, and to give mums the opportunities in the workplace that have been denied to them because too often society thinks that they put themselves out to pasture by having children. Only a Labour government can understand the challenges that we face, but only a Labour government must live to the higher standards that Barbara Castle called us to do so, because it's her legacy that we stand here today to fight for, and her legacy that will deliver for this country.
Ryan Leishman.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship today, and thank you to my honourable friend from Brent East for bringing this important issue to the fore. As a declaration of interest, I am a proud member of Unite the Union and the Community Union. And, Chair, at the heart of this debate is the ongoing problem of inequality, and ultimately who actually holds the power in our country, which has been the consistent issue workers have faced for centuries. Because the truth is that our country and our economy have always been run for the benefit of the few. Historically, those that owned the land, the resources in it, and the people that worked on it. Have control of that, and you have wealth. Therefore, inequality is not a new phenomenon. Chair, if I may be permitted just a little bit more history, the creation of the Labour Party in 1900 meant that, at last, the working class and the trade union movement had an effective voice in Parliament. But for women, it took until 1928, when the Equal Franchise Act was passed, to deliver equal voting rights with men. However, pay discrimination for women is still an issue. And to focus specifically on Scotland, the Scottish Trade Union Congress, using the Office for National Statistics annual survey of hours and earnings, have shown that women in Scotland can expect to see themselves earn an incredible £3,000 a year less than men. This gender pay gap has risen from 6.4% in 2023 to 8.3% in 2024. This is up by 30%. And while the typical Scottish male has seen their hourly pay increase by £1, a Scottish female has seen it increase in comparison by 74p. Yet more inequality built into our society. And this is sadly reflected when we look at local government workers in Scotland, approximately 3/4 of which are female. Local authority workers need and deserve a wage that genuinely reflects their worth and value to society. And after 17 years of the SNP's own brand of austerity, the Scottish Government must now invest in workers and the public services people so drastically rely on. So, Chair, to finish, there was an article yesterday that described how a FTSE 100 boss hourly pay has now hit £1,298. And this shows the gross inequality and unfairness that exists in workplaces. The huge disparity between pay for those at the very top of industry and their staff, those that generate that wealth, has grown bigger. But we cannot look at pay equality just in isolation, because in the ongoing fight for a fairer society, multiple issues must be linked. As well as pay inequality, in Britain today, there are millions of people in the grip of food poverty, living in substandard housing, and overall in a society where there are many other victims of tax injustice. We are still a country where the concentration of wealth and power continues to be in the hands of corporations and not ordinary working people. Because the truth is, the cost of living crisis hasn't gone away. But it's not a crisis for the banks or the supermarkets, the utility companies, or the individual oligarchs that have seen their wealth explode. Austerity and the cost of living crisis have been crises for the poorest, the most vulnerable, the most disadvantaged, and the working class. And thankfully, over the last 2 years, the British Labour movement has led the fight against insatiable corporate greed and avarice. The collective power of trade unions as an effective fighting force for workers' rights has thankfully been re-established. The fight for equality in the workplace and across society, just like the cost of living crisis, goes on.
We now come slightly earlier than anticipated to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It is a pleasure to serve on your chairmanship. I would also like to wish both yourself and everybody else a happy new year, and hope that 2025 is a year in which we do actually make progress again on this area. And I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Brent East for securing this debate, because for me, and I'm sure for everybody in this room, the gender pay gap, all the pay gaps, solving that issue is fundamental to creating a more equal society. We cannot have true freedom and equality of opportunity, of quality of life, of standard of life, of anything in this country if we do not have equality of pay. The Honourable Member for Walthamstow mentioned Barbara Castle. It made me think about the fact that the Equal Pay Act was actually passed in 1963. I was a toddler. And my mother had... Yeah, I was a toddler. And here we are, and I can just see appearing over the horizon retirement. And we are still talking about equal pay for women, but also for ethnicity, disability and LGBT issues. That's sad that it has taken us so long. We have made progress, of course we have made progress, but the statistics are frightening. So many of them, and none of them are encouraging reading. According to the Office of National Statistics, the median hourly pay for full-time employees is 7% less for women. It goes up to 13.1%. It's taken across all hourly paid employees. And as the Honourable Member for Brent East mentioned, we have serious, even more serious issues, I fear, in both ethnicity and disability, because they haven't had the attention over the past 61 years that gender has had. As I say, we have made progress. In government, the Liberal Democrats were instrumental in pushing for large employers to be required to report on gender pay gaps in their organisations. That has led to some transparency and light being thrown on some very serious issues and some very high-profile controversial revelations, particularly in the media sector, where we have seen the massive disparities that are there. And it underlines how far we still have to go, particularly in tackling the inequalities, as I mentioned, in ethnicity and disability, and LGBT, where we still do not have publication, and we do need publication of those gaps. So moving forward, I think this government must tackle the specific economic barriers facing women, ethnic minorities, the disabled and LGBT by expanding, first of all, access to flexible, affordable childcare, doubling statutory maternity pay and expanding, critically, shared parental leave, because I agree with the Honourable Member for Walthamstow. There is absolutely no point in making it about mothers. It has to be about parents, or we simply emphasise the difference and keep it going. Flexible, affordable childcare in itself and early years education is critical to our economic infrastructure and helps close the attainment gap between the wealthy and the poor. It gives parents more choice over how to organise their lives and helps them return to work if they want to. If they want to. You know, go back to 1963, and that was an option that women didn't have then. I remember my mother gave up work. Well, I don't remember because I was too young, but my mother had to give up work when she had me. When she had my sister 7 years later, she'd gone back to work and had to give it up again. And then when she had my youngest sister in 1972, almost 10 years after that legislation was passed about equal pay, she still had to give up work. There was no option to go back to work. So for me, it is critical that we address that. It should be choice. And lack of access to affordable childcare is a key driver of the gender pay gap. Women lose ground when they don't go back to work after they had their children. And I gave up a successful career in journalism not long after my daughter was born because it was simply too expensive. And that was in the 1990s. So the progress that we had made by 1997, when I made that decision, was very limited. But we do have more to do. So, as well as improving that specific area, the government also has to look at improving diversity in the workplace and public life. I want to see that large employers need to monitor and publish data on gender, ethnicity, disability and LGBT+ employment levels, pay gaps and progression, and publish 5-year aspirational diversity targets. They should extend the use of name-blind recruitment processes in the public sector and encourage the use in the private sector. That's critical, because that's a first step to ensuring that employees are treated fairly. And they have to improve diversity in public appointments by setting ambitious targets and requiring progress reports to Parliament, with explanations when targets are not met. And as we have heard, we have to start to see heavy fines when this doesn't happen. I've been fortunate in that working life and those 60 years since the Statutory Pay Act, the Equal Pay Act, and also in the Equality Act in 2010, which made a huge difference. So this Labour government, I would like to see take it further and ensure that in our country we manage to achieve the equality that we've striven for. The Honourable Member for Brent East says it's predicted it will take another 40 years. I won't be here by then, but I would like to see it.
Opposition front bench, Ben Obsi-Jekti.
It is a pleasure to see you in the chair, Sir Roger, for this debate, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Brent East for securing this debate that marks Ethnicity Pay Gap Day today. We've heard from a host of members this morning on the impact of pay gaps in the workplace. The members for Brent East and Dewsbury and Batley both asked what can be done to hold companies to account who don't address identified pay gaps. The members for Walthamstow and Montgomeryshire and Glyndŵr addressed the rights of parents and the motherhood pay gap. The member for Ealing Southall spoke about the disability pay gap and improving the working lives of disabled workers. And the members for Strangeford and Alloa and Grangemouth spoke about regional pay gaps in Northern Ireland and Scotland respectively. These are important topics in an area in which there is still work to be done, despite the progress made over the last half a century. Firstly, addressing gender pay discrimination, and more recently, addressing discrimination based on ethnicity and disability. The Government's manifesto pledged to address the issue of pay gaps and stated that it intends to build upon the existing legislation. On gender, it has been prohibited to pay men and women different pay for the same work in Great Britain since the Equal Pay Act of 1970, legislation since superseded by the Equality Pay Act in 2010. Gender pay gap reporting was introduced by the Conservative government in 2017 with world-leading legislation that made it statutory for organisations with 250 or more employees to report annually on their gender pay gap. Since 2017, the gender pay gap has declined steadily from 18.4% in 2017 to 13.1% in 2024. And I would ask the Minister whether the current government anticipates this trend continuing. And to that end, does the government believe the introduction of additional legislation will close the remaining gap more quickly or have no impact on the current trajectory? ONS data on the gender pay gap from 2024 show that the gender pay gap was highest in skilled trades and occupations and lowest in the caring, leisure and other service occupations. Whilst the government's new legislation will seek to ensure that gender pay disparities are eradicated within organisations, I would also ask the Minister what plans the government has to address the differing pay gaps across industries. The gender pay gap is much higher for full-time employees aged 40 years and over than for employees aged below 40 years. There are a variety of reasons as to why this might be the case, and though I do not have a breakdown for the rationale for this observation, one reason may be the impact that motherhood has on careers and earning potential. What steps are the government taking to address the gender pay gap within this demographic? It is notable that in occupations where pay generally increases with age, the proportion of women decreases, and additionally the difference in pay between the sexes is largest among higher earners. In May 2021, the Labour Party pledged to modernise pay laws to give women the right to know what their male counterpart earns, as alluded to earlier by the members for Brent East and Walthamstow. Whilst this detail did not make it into the manifesto, not that it stopped the government from implementing some of their other recent policies, I would ask the Minister if the government still intends to introduce this right, and if so, could she outline how such a policy would work in practice? Can the Minister provide assurances that private sector pay will remain confidential and not subject to inquiry by co-workers by law? Close to home, we see how this presents itself in our political parties. In 2023, the Conservative Party had a mean gender pay gap of -1.8. Labour Party reporting shows that the Labour Party has a mean gender pay gap of 2%. The gender pay gap for men and women therefore shows that on average, men's hourly earnings are higher than women's within the party. There has been a change from the -2% recorded in 2022. So could the Minister outline what steps have been taken to address the seemingly worsening gender pay gap within the party of government since the 2023 report was published?
Minister for giving way. And I'm pleased to see him using gender pay gap reporting as something he thinks should drive change. Does he therefore want to apologise for the fact that the only business reporting that his previous government abolished during the pandemic was the gender pay gap reporting? If he thinks it's such an important metric, does he now recognise that sent a terrible message about the importance of this data?
Obviously, this was before my time, and so I am not completely au fait with the detail of which you're referring to, but I shall come back to you with some clarification. I was unable to find the Labour Gender Pay Gap report for 2024, nor could I find any ethnicity or disability pay gap reporting, so I would ask the Minister if she could provide an update regarding the 2024 pay gap figures for gender, ethnicity and disability for Labour Party employees. It would be reassuring to see the party of government lead by example by placing themselves in the vanguard of organisations voluntarily providing clarity ahead of introducing it as a legal requirement. On race, the government's manifesto pledged to introduce a landmark Race Equality Act in order to enshrine in law the full right to equal pay for black, Asian and other ethnic minority people. 18 months ago, the Women and Equalities Minister pledged that the Race Equality Act would form a core part of Labour's plans in government. The aspect of that act applicable to this debate is the government's commitment to fine companies not acting on data highlighting a racial pay disparity. The Right Honourable Lady stated that this was a Labour priority, yet as we approach the 6-month point, I would ask the Minister to clarify when the Race Equality Act will be brought before the House, and indeed when companies can be expected to have to implement ethnicity pay gap reporting. The government first made the pledge to introduce ethnicity pay gap reporting in 2021, in a document now deleted from the Labour Party website, but I would ask the Minister how the policy is likely to be implemented. In March 2022, the previous government published Inclusive Britain, its response to the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. Action 16 within the report's recommendations directly addressed ethnicity pay gap reporting in response to Recommendation 9, investigate what causes existing ethnic pay disparities. It stated, we will address the challenges with ethnicity pay gap reporting to support employees who want to demonstrate and drive greater fairness in the workplace. The Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy will publish guidance to employers on voluntary ethnicity pay gap reporting in summer 2022. This guidance, which will include case studies of those companies who are already reporting, will give employers the tools to understand and tackle pay gaps within their organisations and build trust within employees. The previous government published its guidance to employers in April 2023, and I would ask the Minister whether this government will retain the existing guidance and use the measures already in place once reporting becomes mandatory. How will the government ensure that enough workers disclose their ethnicity to make reporting accurate? Can the Minister give assurances that employees will not be forced to disclose their ethnicity on record? How will the legislation improve individual situations should an ethnicity pay gap be identified? Will employees on the wrong side of an identified ethnicity pay gap be informed of their specific circumstances, or will they be left to see the gap identified in the reporting, but then have to rely upon the organisation's action plan in order to redress any imbalance? In January 2023, then Labour Party Chairman, now the Women and Equalities Minister, addressed the reported 9% ethnicity pay gap within the Labour Party between its black and minority staff and its white staff, stating that Labour is determined to close these pay gaps, not just among its own staff. I'd ask the Minister whether now, 2 years later, and ahead of mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting being introduced, if the Labour Party has now addressed its own ethnicity pay gap. The Guardian reported in November that senior Labour MPs were frustrated that there were no senior black staff members at the very centre of a Labour government. It would appear that the party of government still has some work to do. Lastly, the issue of the disability pay gap is one that receives far less scrutiny than either gender or ethnicity. As somebody with a close relative who is a wheelchair user, it is easy to see how disabilities, both visible and hidden, can be overlooked. The government pledged in their manifesto to introduce a full right to equal pay for disabled people, as well as mandatory disability pay gap reporting for large employers. A report from the TUC last November highlighted the current disability pay gap, and it is an area that would benefit from being improved. I would ask the Minister when the government intends to introduce mandatory disability pay gap reporting, and, in addition to the mandatory pay gap reporting, how will the mandatory action plan be used to address identified gaps? A proactive step would be to ensure the introduction of reasonable adjustments passports in order to ensure that the impact of employees' disabilities is documented. Adjustments can be agreed, and any future potential adjustments can be identified, and an employer has a clear record of agreed-upon adjustments which can be easily communicated to new managers. I believe the Government pledged to improving this access within their manifesto too, and I would ask the Minister to outline what progress has been made to achieving this. ONS data for 2023 shows that the disability pay gap was 12.7%, a figure which, unlike the gender pay gap, has remained constant for around a decade, as highlighted by the member for Ealing Southall. That gap is actually wider for men at 15.5% than it is for women at 9.6%. It is also wider for full-time employees than it is for part-time employees. The ONS's disability pay gap analysis showed that disabled men earn a median hourly pay similar to that of non-disabled women. The ONS data also showed that the biggest impact is upon those with autism and epilepsy or learning difficulties. Autism was the highest disability with a 27.9% difference and epilepsy with a 26.9% difference. And I'd like to ask the Minister what steps the Government has taken to reduce these categories of pay gap with the highest difference. Given the increase in instances of autism in children with SEND requirements, I would ask the Minister what steps are being taken now to ensure a better structure is in place for what is likely to be an increase in these disabilities within the workforce. There is still progress to be made with regards to addressing pay gaps within our workforce, and I look forward to the Minister's response and await her giving clarity to the steps the Government has pledged in order to address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship and to also congratulate the Honourable Member for Brent East on having secured this important debate. And I do want to thank her as well, as other members have, for her long-standing advocacy and campaigning on these issues, in which I've been proud to work with her and demonstrated deeply through the speech that she made today. And I do want to also acknowledge the contributions made from across the House, which I think were summarised well by the opposition spokesperson today, and to actually say how pleased I am that to see the support for the direction of travel in which we are going, and also that we need to go further and faster. And I will say, as I seek to make a comment on, I hope, as many of the issues as possible that have been raised by colleagues today, that I thank the opposition spokesperson for his debate. And I do say that if there had been as much passion and commitment to some of these issues, and a focus also on the Conservative Party's record, then I do think that the last 10 and certainly the last 14 years would have seen greater change than we in the end did see happen. So I do hope that he will continue to be a strong voice on these issues, not just in Parliament, but also in his party. Now, today's debate is a welcome opportunity to reaffirm and to highlight this government's commitment to workplace fairness. And I'm incredibly proud that the work we are taking forward in this Parliament is also coming on the back of a long history of commitment to equalities legislation, whether that is the Equal Pay Act or the Race Relations Act or the Sex Discrimination Act or the Equality Act. And indeed, one of the key ways that we can measure fairness in the pay that workers receive is looking at pay gaps. Now, pay gaps indeed look at the differences in the average pay between groups. For example, the average earnings of women compared to men. And we have had a number of contributions on the range and the differences in pay gaps as well. While equal pay is a direct comparison of the pay of individuals doing the same or similar work. Now, while pay gaps don't necessarily mean that pay discrimination has taken place, frankly, often they do. And they can point to opportunities not provided and processes that lock people out. And these are issues of fairness and workplace security as well. And pay gaps can also mean that employers are missing out on the talents and skills of a diverse workforce and all the benefits that come with that. That's why closing pay gaps of all kinds is in everyone's interest, which is why we do want to go further and faster in this Parliament to reach this ambition. And that makes sense for business, for society, for employers more widely, and for our economy. Now, the timing of this debate is particularly welcome, given that, as my honourable friend has also said, that Ethnicity Pay Gap Day falls tomorrow, on January the 8th. And I want to acknowledge the work of Diane Grayson and other campaigners
2022. And since 2018, it has been highlighting the need for decisive action to tackle ethnicity pay gaps, just like the Disability Pay Gap Day, which was marked on the 7th of November, and Equal Pay Day on the 20th of November. And these dates serve as reminders of just how far we have to go. We know that ONS data shows that Black, African, Caribbean and Black British employees have consistently earned less than white employees when looking at median gross hourly pay. In 2023, the pay gap between disabled and non-disabled employees was 12.7%. And in 2024, the gender pay gap still stood at 13.1%. Now, a number of issues were raised, not just by my honourable friend, the Honourable Lady, in relation to accountability, enforcement, regional variation, the right to know, and so on. And I will make a few opening remarks before, I hope, addressing the points in my contribution today. Though I recognise the contribution, there may be a shortage of time to address all the points that have been raised today, Sir Roger, and I'm very happy to pick up with colleagues afterwards. I'm proud that in the King's Speech in July, we strengthened our plans to introduce legislation to root out inequalities and strengthen protections against discrimination. And as part of the King's Speech, we announced the Equality, Race and Disability Bill. Through this bill, we will introduce mandatory ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting for employers with 250 or more employees, building on the requirement to publish gender pay gap data. This is a major next step in equalities legislation. The publishing of an ethnicity pay gap report is a debate that has had the engagement of a range of key stakeholders, from Runnymede to CIPD, BITC, Share Action, Unison, and many others. And we also know that many ethnic minority workers still face barriers to progression in the workplace. For example, in March 2023, over 26% of the workforce across NHS trusts in England were from an ethnic minority background, but only 11% of those at a senior manager level. Similarly, whilst there has been growth in employment rates for disabled people in recent years, there are still gaps, significant gaps, as the member, my honourable friend, the member for Ealing Southall, has laid out. And disabled people have, on average, lower incomes, as we know, than non-disabled people. I do want to make a couple of comments in relation to the disability pay gap and employment issues. And I know that my honourable friend has met with the Minister for Disabled People and to mention that she and with her expertise and the contribution she's raised in relation to the Disability Employment Charter, they are comments that we are taking into account in our response to the PSC that I hope will be coming shortly. And we also remain committed to publishing the findings of the Disability Workforce Reporting Consultation of 2021-2022. I'm conscious of time. I'll give you very quickly.
Just before we proceed, and this is entirely my fault, we imposed a time limit, or I imposed a time limit on speeches earlier. Two members then dropped out, which has left us perversely slightly underrunning. What I should have done was indicated to the front benches at the start of the front bench contributions that we had a little more time than we might need. I think it's probably in the interests of the House that we hear what the Minister has to say. So I'm going to allow the Minister to run over very slightly, and if she wishes to take the intervention, she may do so.
Well, thank you.
Minister, thank you for your contribution. And Minister, you'll know that my question to you will never be adversarial. Mr Chairman, Sir Roger, in relation to what the Minister has referred to, the Honourable Lady, in relation to disability action, has the Minister, because that's the thrust of my contribution, has the Minister had an opportunity to discuss these matters with the Northern Ireland Assembly equivalent Minister? It's really important that we're following the same line of thought as happens here. Just to ask that question, please, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his comments, and I do understand that we are engaging with our colleagues in our devolved governments and and across the country in relation to mayors also playing a part. And I'm very happy to pick that up with my colleague, the Minister for Disabilities, as well. But this is a priority for how this government is working, in that we are making sure that we're engaging much more with our devolved governments and making sure that the voice of the whole of the UK is heard in the legislation that we're also bringing forward, and how we work together. I do just want to make a couple of comments in relation to issues that were raised in response to parental and shared leave, and also employment rights. And it is worth just making a couple of points in relation to this, that our plan to make work pay also included a commitment to review the parental leave system, and also alongside our wider plans to boost family-friendly rights, so that workers and employers can benefit from improvements in productivity and well-being. And as part of the Employment Rights Bill, that includes making existing entitlements to paternity leave and unpaid parental leave available from day one of employment, and enabling parents to take their parental leave and pay after their shared parental leave and pay. And we are improving access to flexible working, which I think is going to be extremely important in how we can move forward further in this space. And I'm happy to take the intervention. The commitment to look at these issues. Can I just put on the record, though, how many of us believe that actually shared parental leave has set us back in terms of equality between the genders? Because actually we've seen that it's been a disaster in terms of who's taken it up, because it asks women to give up their maternity leave. Men don't pick it up. What we need to do is give men leave that is paid and protected in their own right, if we are ever to have equality between the sexes. So can I put that on the Minister's table as something we need to look at, that shared parental leave is not the answer here? Minister. I thank my honourable friend for making that point, and she will also know that a number of these issues go across other government departments, and that her views and her voice is very much heard in this place. And I would encourage her also to continue to engage with other ministers on this. But I do just want to make this point as well, that in relation to issues for pregnant women and new mothers, that has also been raised by colleagues in the debate today, that pregnant women and new mothers also they deserve to know the law is on their side. And we will put in place legislation that makes it unlawful to dismiss pregnant women and mothers on maternity leave, and also mothers who return to work for a 6-month period after they return, except in specific circumstances. And I think strengthening the legislation in all of these areas is an important part of how we're continuing to take our programmes forward in a way that's good for our economy, good for our society, and good for families too. Just to continue with the contributions I was making in relation to both ethnicity and disability in relation to employment gaps, and also pay gaps. Introducing mandatory ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting will provide transparency and vital data to help businesses identify and address pay gaps within their workforces, and identify and remove barriers to progression. It will shine a light on those businesses taking welcome steps to promote talents of ethnic minority and disabled workers, whilst also holding to account those who neglect to do so and to make progress. The bill will also enshrine the full right to equal pay for ethnic minority and disabled people, who will seek to remove barriers and to redress for claimants. And these measures, as has been commented on today, aren't just about diversity and inclusion. They make good economic sense. The evidence shows that the adoption of such policies leads to improved productivity, improved rates of progression and retention, and profitability. And for example, our analysis in opposition indicated that closing the employment gap that ethnic minority people face could add almost £36 billion to our economy.
However, anyone who is also familiar with pay gap reporting knows that the changes we're making here aren't simple or easy. There are complex matters with numerous challenges, whether it be on disclosure rates, for which we will be producing more guidance, but also granularity of reporting. And that's why we have listened not only to stakeholder calls when it comes to introducing these measures, but we continue to do that in relation to how we will actually make this all work in practice. That will be part of an important set of consultations that we undertake this year, including roundtabled discussions over the next few months, and I look forward to certainly attending my first one in collaboration with Share Action early in March. And in relation to when we'll bring legislation forward, we have committed to publishing the draft legislation in this parliamentary session. And as I have raised with the honourable member for Brent East, we will be bringing forward the consultation shortly, and that will be an opportunity for many of these issues to be raised in wider dialogue as we move forward on our plans. I also do want to make mention in relation to closing the employment gaps and best practice in good practice in workplaces, that the Get Britain Working White Paper published by the Department for Work and Pensions in November last year, which I think was a really groundbreaking piece of work, cross-government work. It sets out the details of reform to employment support to also help tackle rising economic inactivity levels and supporting people into good work, creating an inclusive labour market, all of which is part of the backdrop for how we make legislation be more impactful in workplaces too. And this includes a new service to support more people getting into work and help them get on in work. Local Get Britain Working plans across England will be led by mayors and local areas, and with a youth guarantee for all people aged 18 to 21 in England for education, training or help to find work. And I would encourage members to also engage in that activity as we take it forward. In relation to gender pay gaps, we're also making changes to existing reporting requirements to further ensure that employers are taking the steps we need to narrow their gaps. It is absolutely right to say that progress on reducing the UK gender pay gap has stagnated, and we need employers to take action to change that. Organisations have been reporting data since 2017, but employers being encouraged to publish action plans voluntarily. But 2019 analysis found that only half of employers had produced details of the actions that they developed or implemented to address their gender pay gap. And as part of the Employment Rights Bill introduced to Parliament in October last year, action plans will become a requirement, and these will ensure that organisations are taking effective steps to improve gender equality in their workplace, and we continue to engage on how we will make those most effective. This will also focus minds on steps to, for example, support employees during the menopause, introducing much needed accountability as well into reporting. And finally, there are a number of ways in which this government is acting on the drivers of pay gaps and securing fairness more broadly in our workplaces. The landmark Employment Rights Bill contains robust measures to safeguard working people, including protections from sexual harassment and enhanced rights for pregnant workers, as well as measures which have the potential to change workplace culture for the better, with elements, as I've mentioned, around flexible working and expanded day rights or day one rights. So we do have an ambitious agenda to ensure that workplace rights are fit for a modern economy, empower working people and deliver economic growth. That's why we are working at pace across government to make this agenda a reality. So over 50 years after the Equal Pay Act of 1970 and 14 years after the Equality Act, now 15 years almost after the Equality Act 2010. I am proud that we are now taking action at pace, and in closing I want to again thank all honourable members for their contributions this morning. Thank you.
Dawn Butler to wind up the debate.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and a big thank you to everyone who participated in this debate today. I think this shows Parliament kind of at its best, and it's really great to see that there's no opposition, real opposition to championing equal pay. And that means that now we've got a Labour government, that it has taken a long time, but now we can deliver it. And that is the beauty of having a Labour government that's committed to ensuring that people who are working are fully paid and are respected in the workplace. So although the honourable member from Edinburgh West said that, you know, she wants to be alive to see it, I think with a Labour government, we are going to see it. So you'll be alive to see that close completely in regards to the gap. And Sir Roger, it's really interesting that a country where the pay gap is really small is Norway. And in Norway, you can actually find out how much anybody is paid. I mean, that's taken it further than we would, I think, in the UK. But it's interesting to see that because you have that disinfectant, as honourable members have said around the House today, because you've got that light on the problem, you're able to see it and close it. So I don't think we should be scared of having people knowing what people are earning, especially if you're working side by side with them. There shouldn't be anything to worry about. And I think that it's really interesting that the Employment Rights Bill is going to tackle a lot of this. And I think what we need to do is make sure as we go through committee stage that we take on all of the suggestions that's going to accelerate this progress. It has taken way too long. We know it exists. We know that equal pay is a problem. And as we've said, everybody in the House today has said, well, why don't we close it? We know it exists. It shouldn't exist for anybody, whether you're male, female, regardless of your gender or your colour or your class or your age or your size. This should be about fairness and equality. And I think that, yes, we have come far, but not far enough. We will know when we have reached true equality, when everybody is just paid well. So I think we should shine a light on everything. And I want to thank all of the contributors today, because I think what we've shown is that the purpose of government and legislation is to make the world fairer for everybody that is in it. And we can do that via legislation, we can do that via winning hearts and minds, and we can do that by shining a light on the injustices that exist. And if we close the equal pay gap, we will be taking a huge step forward in that aim. So thank you, Sir Roger.
The question is that this House has considered pay gaps in the workplace. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. Contrary, no? Ayes have it. Order. Sitting suspended until 11 o'clock.